Hi everyone! Today I'm going to be talking about why I am unemployed. I've been a professional web developer for over 3 years and I've been unemployed for the past 5 months. In this video, I will talk about my background as a web developer, my last role, why I left my last role, how I'm currently feeling, and advice for you if you're in a similar situation. The true goal of this video is to give my story, so if you are in a similar situation and you're job hunting in this extremely tough market, you can know you're not alone. You can get my perspective on how things are. Even if you are not unemployed and you're contemplating quitting your job or making a move, this video is also for you, just so you can hear what it's like from someone who's going through the process. So for those of you who don't know me, I'd first like to talk about how I got into web development. I first got into web development about 4.5 years ago when I was a 4th year in college. I did major in computer science and I just didn't know what I was going to do with my life after graduating. And that's when I stumbled upon coding and web development. So I took some courses on Code Academy, I took some courses on LinkedIn Learning. So I got an introduction to web development that way. And that was about 6 months before graduation, maybe a little over 6 months before graduation. So I built personal projects, I built my portfolio at the time, and I was very lucky that only a week after graduating, I secured my first job. I was an intern, a full-time intern at an agency. So it was at that agency that I got the internship where I worked for the next 3 years. And so now let's talk about what my role or roles were throughout my progression at that agency. So to give a little bit of an overview of the agency, it was a small creative agency. They primarily work in the beauty, wellness, and consumer packaged goods space. They do a lot of e-commerce work, so it was a lot of Shopify work, even though we would occasionally get WordPress or Squarespace projects as well. So I started as an intern where I would really just assist the other developers on projects that they were working on. So whether it was building out Shopify storefronts, I would help them, or sometimes I would do content things. And so that's what the majority of my work was as an intern. After about 8 months, I got promoted to junior developer or front-end developer 1. And that's when I really started taking more leadership over projects. And in that time, I became, for some projects, a technical lead. Because it was such a small agency, and when I say small, I mean the company during my time there had anywhere between, I would say, 10 to 21 people. And the development team at its largest was 4 people. Because of that, how it would usually work is projects would come in and then they would be assigned to a developer, and that developer would be the main point of contact for all things related to the project. So whoever was the technical lead on the project would do solution or technical planning, which is where we would meet with the client, understand their expectations, and then we would draft up a plan about what they would need in their stack to accomplish that. Then after technical planning and after the project went through the design phases, then it would come back around to us for development, where we would actually build the website. And then after development, we would do internal QA. And then after internal QA, we would hand it to the client and have them do a client QA. Then we would launch the site. And so as a technical lead on the project, I was really responsible for leading those phases. And I would say I started being that technical lead towards the latter half of my role as a junior developer. And then when I was promoted to mid-level developer, I pretty much was leading every project that was coming my way. So now that you know more about my role and responsibilities, there's the question of why did I want to leave and why did I ultimately choose to leave? So I had one primary reason that I wanted to leave, and that was a lack of growth in the role. Like I mentioned, I was at that agency for 3 years. In the beginning, I was learning a lot. It was my first professional web development job, so there was a lot for me to learn, whether it was development or learning how to interact with clients, or whether it was learning about project management. I was growing a lot, and I continued to grow when I started taking on my own projects in the agency and had to lead those projects. And I also grew when we would get projects that weren't Shopify and were on other platforms. But ultimately, a lot of the work that agency would get was very similar to work we had already done with just small adjustments. And it became very repetitive, and there was a point where I felt like I plateaued in how much I was growing. I wanted to feel like I was continuing to grow as a developer, and I was also curious about what other kinds of development work there was. Like I mentioned, I primarily was doing Shopify e-commerce work, but I was very interested in what it would be like to build the apps maybe that, are used on Shopify, or build apps in general, or build more of a software as a service product. I felt like it was too early in my career to decide that this is the niche that I want to be in. And because of that, I really, really wanted to explore the different niches to see what I personally liked best. And one saying that I truly believe in is working to learn. And if you're in an environment where you don't feel like you're learning anymore, or you're not growing anymore, then it's time to get a new position. It was something that I had thought about a lot and was on my mind for a while. And in addition to feeling like I wasn't learning enough, because it was such a small agency, I also felt that there was a lack of career progression. Even if I were to move up, like if my title were to change and I were to get promoted, I felt that I would still be doing a lot of the same things. So that's very similar in feeling like I wouldn't learn anymore, but I believe that when you progress in your titles, your responsibilities should change in some sense. And I didn't feel like that agency, I was going to get different responsibilities as I progressed. So those are the reasons that I left. How am I feeling now? So it has been almost 5 months since I left my position. And 5 months is a lot of time to decide on how I feel. But let me explain what I've been up to during these 5 months. So I've only been applying to jobs for the past 2 months. The first 3 months, it was a mixture of taking time off and building projects. I would say the first 2 to 3 weeks, I took time off. And then after that, I was building personal projects. Because again, I wanted to learn and I wanted to grow. And there were specific technologies that I wanted to learn. In my case, it was React. It was working with more back-end technologies. And so I wanted to build React projects. I wanted to build full stack projects. And so I spent the first few months of my unemployment learning those technologies and just learning by building things. And I was able, within the first 3 months, able to launch one project, which was my portfolio. And then I had another project that I was working on that was more of a technical project, and it was like a full stack project. And I didn't finish that in the first 3 months. I actually just released like an alpha release, I want to say like 2 weeks ago. I haven't actually announced it yet, but I will be releasing that, like officially announcing it in the upcoming week, so stay tuned for that. So how am I feeling overall after going through those first 3 months and then 2 months after starting to apply to jobs? So first and foremost, I would say it's definitely a tough market, and a lot of people probably know this. When I was hearing people say that it was a tough market when I still had my job, I didn't know how much to believe it. And it's not because I was unaware of the layoffs that had happened. It's not because I didn't see the posts of people saying it was a tough market. The reason I didn't know how much to believe is because until I started applying to things, I really wouldn't know what that experience would be like. I think a really good example is when I was a senior in college. From everything that I was seeing in media, I thought, oh, it's going to be tough for me to get that first job. I might be unemployed for 6 months after college because I'm self-studying and people are looking for a CS degree or they're looking for a boot camp, so it's going to be really tough. And I ended up getting a job within a week after graduating, which I was incredibly lucky for. And so that was a really good example of, I was hearing one thing from media, but when I actually tried it for myself, it was a completely different experience. And in that case, it could have just been luck. I was in the right place at the right time and I got the opportunity. And so that's why when I heard people saying it's a tough market now, I was thinking in my head, well, people are saying that, but is that really going to be my experience? I won't know until I actually start applying to things and I enter the market. But 5 months later, 2 months later, really, 2 months of applying to things, in my experience, I do believe it's a really tough market. To give numbers, as of today, I have submitted over 70 applications for positions and I have gotten 0 callbacks. And so that callback rate is absolutely abysmal and it's been very tough dealing with that. So from my experience and those numbers, I would definitely say it's a tough market right now. However, as far as I'm feeling, despite the tough market and whether I regret my decision for quitting my job before I had another one lined up, I don't feel regretful because I achieved a lot of what I wanted to out of leaving my position. At the time, I was okay with being unemployed for a little bit. So my number one goal really was growing as a developer, growing as an engineer and learning. And I've been able to do that. I've grown a lot more than I know I would have at the agency. And so that's why I don't necessarily feel regret. Some days do I feel a little anxious and worried about when my next job will come? Absolutely. But that is a very different feeling from regret. So it's somewhat of a bittersweet feeling, but I'm just in a position now where I have to roll with the punches. So now that you've heard my story and my experience over the past 5 months, what are some takeaways for you? So I have 4 main takeaways. The first is, if you are contemplating leaving a job, start applications now while you still have your job. And the reason I say that is because that's going to give you insight on the market. We can look at the numbers and we can definitely see trends of why the number of jobs for software engineers and tech in general is a lot lower now. Don't ignore those numbers, but I also think it's really valuable for you to see how employers and how the market would respond to you specifically. Starting applications while I still had a job would have really let me see what kinds of jobs are getting posted, what are the requirements for the jobs, what are they asking you to know, are people actually reaching back out to you even though you thought you didn't know enough? It gives you all of those insights, and that's very important before the second piece of advice, which is strategize after applications. You might have the strategy for how you're going to make your next move, what kind of position that you want, what you need to learn, what you need to build. Make that strategy after you have gotten insight into the market, after you have gotten personal insight into the market. And let me give you an example. So my portfolio is very animation heavy. So I wanted to create something visually appealing that would stand out with really fun animations and a lot of interactivity. And in my mind, I thought this portfolio is going to stand out so much. I'm going to be getting calls 24/7. After applying to jobs, what I'm now realizing is there might be people who aren't even getting to my portfolio because maybe I don't have enough of the skills or experience in certain things for them to even take a look at my portfolio. So that's something, that's an example of something that I didn't really consider. And so that brings me to my third piece of advice, which is beware of unemployment creep. And yes, that is a term that I just made up. But what I mean by that is when I'm applying to jobs, even though I've only been applying for 2 months, which is a relatively short amount of time, I feel like this has been going on forever. And the reason I feel like that is because I've been unemployed for 5 months total, right? Even though 3 months I wasn't applying to jobs, but I don't realize that it's only been 2 months that I've actually been putting myself out there. So it's very early in terms of job applications, but it's starting to feel later in terms of how long I've actually been unemployed. So once again, I would suggest starting applications as soon as possible. And the fourth piece of advice is to learn to deal with negative emotions. Definitely when you're unemployed, even if you are unemployed for the right reasons and you're confident in your decision, there's going to be moments where you're going to question yourself. There's going to be moments where you don't feel so great when you let those, all the negativity that you're seeing get to you. And it's so important to combat those feelings because this is a marathon, and so it's very important that you learn to deal with those negative emotions. And there's a few ways that I've learned to do this. Number one is do not read doom posts. So all of those LinkedIn posts, Twitter threads that are saying, the market is so horrible, recruiters are ghosting me, these ghost jobs, everything's bad, everything's on fire, don't read that. The second is to set very clear and distinct boundaries between the work that you're doing for your career and your personal life. I've definitely fell into the trap occasionally of letting my growth and learning new things and working towards this career that I want bleed into my personal life. And that just leads to burnout. It just leads to me feeling like I'm working on this stuff 24/7. And definitely if you want to grind like that, go for it. But if you want more of a balance, set those clear boundaries. And so that's my advice from my experience so far, and I hope that it helps you. So there you have it. You've learned all of the details about my last role, how I felt after leaving my last role. I've given you some advice from my experience. I hope that anyone who's going through a similar situation knows that they're not alone. And if you're contemplating going into the market, I hope you've also taken something away from this video. But I would like to hear from you, and I would like to hear what your experience is. If there's other pieces of advice that you would give to people in a similar situation. This is definitely a community. The one thing that we can do is be there for each other. So until next time, bye.